I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, Maria Menudos.
Good morning. It's an honor to be here today as part of this timely conversation, and I'd love for you to please join me in welcoming Ambassador Luis Gallegos, Chairman of the Global UN Partnership for Inclusive Information and Communication Technologies. Professor Roy McConkey, Professor of Development Disabilities, University of Ulster. And Katie Middick, Platform Marketing for Facebook and Special Olympics International Board Member. Okay. Oh, my mic is working. Whoa. All right. Professor McConkey, from your perspective, what impact did hosting the 2003 Special Olympics World Summer Games have on Ireland's diversity index level? And do you feel citizens were more open to individuals with intellectual disabilities after the World Games?
Well, there's no doubt the World Games in Dublin made a big impact nationally, and we'd like to think internationally. I think you have to also remember that World Games is more than just an opening ceremony and the activity. If anything, the host town program probably touched people at an individual level. And the important thing was the media profile that the Games got, both in visual media, radio, as well as print media, because that brought the Games home to people in their own living rooms. So all of that aspect really did impact well. And 8 years afterwards, it's still talked about as being one of those landmark events. So much so that the organizer of the World Games is now standing for election as President of Ireland. So wow. How much more impact can you have?
What advice would you give communities and countries on how to be more receptive to individuals with intellectual disabilities?
Personal contact is really critical. Individuals in communities, citizens of the sort that we've been hearing about this morning, have to connect with people at a personal level, see the person beyond the label. So it's important that we create opportunities for people to meet. Second thing is that we have to get beyond stigma and stereotypes. And indeed, much of the data that Gallup have produced may be reinterpreted as a measure of how people stigmatize intellectual disability and how they stereotype people. But that can happen and still does happen around the world. And really the only solution, I think, effective solution to that has been the advocacy of people with an intellectual disability speaking up for themselves and their families speaking up for them. So Special Olympics is really great at helping people get that voice, and that challenges the stigma and stereotypes. I suppose the third thing I would say is how it's really important that we have a legislative basis so that people realize that they have a right to be included, and we have anti-discriminatory laws where people can take legal challenges if that's happening. But maybe the biggest message of all is that if you have high receptivity, then don't be complacent. England and Ireland both came up very highly in those indexes. But in the last month, on British television and on Irish television, we have had exposés of how people with intellectual disability were being bullied and abused within the very services that were there to help them. So that bullying can still go on at a very basic level. So we can never be complacent, and that these high scores may not reflect the reality for many people.
Did the scores or the Gallup findings surprise any of you?
I certainly think the diversity, even in some regions, was really surprising, just in terms of specific countries. And it'd be interesting to kind of even look at that data at a local level and understand, even in certain kind of big DMAs or kind of at the city or town level. And I think that's a really interesting kind of way to get people engaged and understanding how receptive their community is, might be to actually share that data, find a way to share that data. One of the things we could do with Facebook is actually take that data and turn it into a quiz. You know, how receptive is your community? Get people to learn kind of where they rank, where their community stacks up. Quite naturally, the people who are most interested in having accepting communities would respond to engaging with that. And then it identifies them as the evangelists and give them a way to kind of take action, whether they should, you know, tell their story or, like the Facebook page on Special Olympics, get access to more stories, or support this legislation or this policy that's being developed in your area. I think would be a really interesting way to make it relevant and real to the people living in these countries about, you know, where they stack up and what they can do.
Well, and on the local level, if you let them know that they ranked in a particularly good way, would probably be more motivation. They'd feel proud, obviously, right?
Yeah, but I agree actually with the comments you just made about also making sure that doesn't make people complacent.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we all have a platform. We have platforms in our companies. We have platforms in our families and friends. More of those platforms are moving online, where it's a lot faster, more efficient to share your stories. We can share them in really robust ways. And I challenge all of us, you know, whether we come from a place that has a high receptivity index or a low one, to tell our stories. Because on these platforms, I firmly believe that that's the best way to engage. And on Facebook in particular, Facebook is all about people. And it's all about actually connecting the people throughout the world so that they can share. And if you think about kind of the way that people share, you know, a person on Facebook has an average number of 130 friends. And you get and she told her friends, and he told their friends, and things travel by word of mouth, which is the best marketing you can have to get the stories out there. And then we have people who are attached to this movement that have much larger platforms with millions of people who follow them on Facebook, or millions of people who follow their brands. And so using those platforms to tell the stories so that people engage and get the opportunity to feel all the achievement, the excitement, the love, really get a chance to feel what's happening here and take that, you know, to their friends and their friends.
Ambassador Gallegos, how can the Gallup Diversity Receptivity Index be used to influence government and public policy?
Well, I think there's an advocacy on the basis of this issue, and taking an example of what's happening in Greece now. You have a very complicated economic situation, and we acknowledge that this is an extraordinary event, having a Special Olympics at this moment with a vision of hope. And at the same time, you see a decision by Parliament of inclusive education. So I do think that it's an advocacy of moving forward to having a more inclusive society. My English is not my first language, so I have to clarify this. Sometimes when we talk about communities, we talk about neighborhoods. In my language sphere, a community is where you live in reality in your petite world. In my context, you talk about integrated societies, holistic societies. I come from a plurinational, pluriethnic culture. So the adaptability of moving and growing up and being educated in different languages, different capabilities, makes you a more diversified and more acceptable. Notwithstanding the Gallup statistics of high income, I really think that inclusive societies can be poor societies, where you have a family-based issue. So you have to be very sensitive to the capabilities of diversified and pluralistic societies. In other words, maybe the question should be asked inversely. How integrated is your society now? Because I have to recognize that there is a Western bias in some of these aspects. You do statistics in a way that proves something that you're going to do. It's very difficult to do this in societies that on a day-to-day basis are fighting to eat, simply to survive. So when you talk about diversity, you talk about employment, you talk about jobs, you talk about life expectancy and death. I also find that you have to take into consideration something that is very important. One of the most vulnerable groups of the world are women. And that was not mentioned in the statistics. I think that when you talk about these issues, you talk about women, children, indigenous populations, which are segregated, migrants, and then you go into labor. You have a whole range of people. There's a big discussion in the world that this is not a vulnerability that is inherent to a woman. It's that society makes them vulnerable to violence, internal and domestic violence, and so on. So what you're trying to do is have a society that respects the essence of the individual fundamentally. And if Special Olympics, that does an extraordinary advocacy of proving the hope of an individual and a community and a society, can get a message of advocacy by using the same 170 units in every one of the countries to sensitize parliaments, the executive, and even civil society. Because you said something that is extraordinarily true. You do this on a person-to-person basis. This is you looking at yourself in a mirror and being able, you in yourself, to be able to surpass your ignorance, your incapabilities, your religious beliefs on what you think intellectual disability is. Because we still have a challenge of defining what intellectual disability really is and how we should deal with it legally, sociologically, anthropologically, and so on.